Hey YouTube, I wanted to upload my own little book review of Do Androids Dream of Electric Sheep by Philip K. Dick. And I have the movie version with the big words Blade Runner in parentheses, the actual book title there, and of course the image from the film, and more images from the film on the back and everything. But this was a book written by Philip K. Dick in 1968, and it's the first book that I've actually read by Philip K. Dick after watching a very interesting documentary that is also on YouTube. It's an 8-parter, I think, or maybe a 7-parter. I definitely recommend checking it out if you haven't, because it puts his text in perspective. Um, Philip K. Dick was not much of a well-known author during his lifetime, and it is only towards the end of his life, before he had a serious, I think, stroke, um, where he began to be well known, and a lot of his films were adapted into movies or planning on being adapted into films. So he got to be established later on in his life, unfortunately, at the end of his life. Um, so this book, and like many of his books, as I'm reading and as his own life sort of portrays, explores reality and virtuality, what's real and what's unreal. Um, so, like the other books, this world that he's created takes place in the future, and it takes place in a time where the world has been devastated and destroyed for the most part. The natural environment has been wrecked. There's very few forests and environment, like true environments left, ecosystems left in the planet, on the planet, and most people have moved off-world onto the colonies. Um, and when you move off-world, you receive an android who's supposed to be sort of like your helper. You move off-world, you get a free android. You get somebody to assist you in transitioning to uh, a new colony. But those who stay on Earth are kind of the remnants, the boondocks of humanity. They're the survivors, and also the people who have been genetically altered somehow, who aren't allowed to move off the world and procreate because the thinking behind it is that, well, you're genetically mutated. You shouldn't be allowed to partake in continuing the human species. Um, and one of the interesting things about the book is, since most of the people in this world don't have real organic creatures, they end up getting fake creatures and electronic animals to um, to as a form of social status. So owning a real animal versus a fake animal is a social status. It means you have the money, it means you have the prestige, it means you have the wealth um, to own something of such value. So for instance, the main character has a goat, but the goat dies, so he has to buy this electric one. The electric one, you know, it's just not the same, and he's self-aware of it, and so on and so forth. And his neighbor has a real horse, and there's a kind of envy and jealousy that's going on there. So I think the world itself is very interestingly developed, and it's very real, it's very vivid, and it's very dark. Um, One of the characters describes a kind of kibble atmosphere, a kind of mess, an entropic universe where everything's falling apart, and um, those who are left on this planet are just trying to keep everything together just a little bit longer for their own lives. So that being said, it is a little bit dismal. However, androids themselves are not allowed on the planet. They're not allowed on Earth. And those that do sneak their way to Earth to live a free life, not as servants or slaves of humanity, but as independent beings, they get hunted down by characters like the protagonist, Rick Deckard. He's a bounty hunter. So this story is basically about one of his biggest jobs he gets, killing well, he's ordered to kill a great number of androids who have snuck onto Earth, and if you've seen the movie, it's a loosely adapted version of that story, and I don't want to really give away too many details, but I did want to kind of share a theme or two that I really liked. Um, Now, one thing was, of course, your quintessential dialogue. Is an android conscious? Is it a human being? Is it sentient? Should it have rights like we do? Um, so in many of the scenes, the character Rick encounters androids who he appears to have either feelings for or empathy for, which he himself during the story kind of gets freaked out about because he, before then, didn't really have that same kind of empathy. But when he runs across another bounty hunter who seems to take pleasure in destroying the androids, um, he begins to realize that he actually has a certain amount of empathy for these beings, to the point where he's wondering if he even should be destroying them. For instance, one of them is an opera singer, and in the story, in the movie adaptation, she becomes a kind of exotic, naked dancer with a snake, whereas in the book itself, she's a high cultured opera singer. And he questions himself: should I kill um, a person, fake or not, who's contributing something to society that is not very common? She has a beautiful voice. She puts on these wonderful performances. Who am I to destroy that? And I mean, me, just a bounty hunter living in, the slum of a city. Why are we destroying these people? So these are some of the questions he asks. He also gets intimately involved with an android, um, and the android expresses feelings for him. So there's questions of whether or not an android can feel, can love, what it does it mean to be human in this kind of circumstance. Um, Another big theme is, again, like I said, the exploration of reality and fantasy. What's real and what's not. The main character gets involved in this other bounty hunter office that is potentially the real bounty hunter office, and he's questioning whether or not his memories have been implanted. So he never really was a bounty hunter, but maybe he was just an android who's been implanted with these memories. So it leaves all these questions up. Are we human? Are we not human? What's real and what's unreal? What's the worth of destroying these machine beings if they themselves can offer so much to society and to culture? What's wrong with them being free? Can they feel? Can they exist like we do? Do they exist like we do? Um, and finally, two last points. Within the story, there are these tests to see if you're an android or not, and they're based upon empathy. And now, empathy is, of course, the ability to feel for somebody else, to kind of go through what they're going through, to have compassion for somebody. And androids, being extremely brilliant, are nevertheless emotionally challenged. They're not able to quite feel like humans feel. And if they do feel, we don't know what that's like. But at any rate, they tend to fail empathy tests. And so the main character puts androids through empathy tests. Um, but again, like I mentioned, the irony is he begins to have empathy for them. Um, and then secondly, there's the question of, well, what makes androids more or less important than living organisms? Like, let's say, coveting a mouse, a real live mouse, a real live rabbit, a real live animal that's organic and not synthetic. What's wrong with synthetic? But then empathy plays the biggest role in the book through the religion of, I think it's pronounced mercerism. And mercerism is this very interesting idea for a global religion, actually, that Philip K. Dick imagined, that I think foreshadows a little bit of our own time period. And basically, um, it's this technology. You take it in your hand, you hold it by these handles, and it envelops you in a kind of psychedelic virtual experience where you connect, and you connect with the emotions and thoughts and feelings of people from all over the world, and you collectively participate in this dreamy ritual of climbing this mountain where this prophet or founder, Mercer, is said to have climbed. And you all kind of experience rocks being thrown at you that kind of, I guess, symbolize, maybe in a certain sense, like Jesus walking to his crucifixion. You experience the pain that Mercer feels, having rocks thrown at him. And it's a kind of cosmic tragedy because Mercer is unable to, for whatever reason. Philip K. Dick is a little abstract sometimes with the narrative, so it's hard to follow him. But they're partaking in this ritual of climbing to the top of the mountain where Mercer is trying to recreate the world, or renew the world, and bring everyone up from suffering and darkness. But there's some kind of existential problem where the people throwing rocks at him have prevented him from renewing the world completely. So he's kind of forced to renew life, or to see life even in the most obscure and devastating dimensions of the universe. He's forced to suffer with the rest of the universe as it kind of drags itself on in an attempt to renew itself. And it's this kind of dark but also hopeful religious mythology. But I bring it up because I think it's so interesting that Everybody is literally logging onto these machines, connecting to them, empathizing with each other, and partaking in a collective ritualistic myth. Now, many myths are, of course, collective. I mean, in the Catholic Church, you partake in a myth through the Mass, through the rituals, through the sacraments. And in many churches and in many religious organizations, everybody partakes in a collective ritual in order to experience something together. So in a very, ordinary sense, there's nothing really new about this religion than any religion that's in the past. But in another sense, I think McLuhan may have been either consciously or unconsciously picking up on the internet age, of course, in the electronic age. Um, Funny enough, writing around the same time as Philip K. Dick was Marshall McLuhan, and Marshall McLuhan described the television at the time, and all forms of electronic media at the time, for having an empathizing effect on human beings, for making them feel holistic, connected, to giving the face of the other some tangibility. And some have argued, political scientists, social scientists, and media theorists have said that the 1960s revolution couldn't have happened without television. Um, so this form of electronic technology that brings people together and makes people empathize with each other was going on at the time that Philip K. Dick was writing this book. And then secondly, what I find to be interesting, it kind of is a foreshadowing of Gaia theory and Gaia hypothesis, and of course the internet, a global interconnected network where everybody's sharing their thoughts and sometimes their feelings with each other online and through virtual worlds. Now, it certainly doesn't compare to mercerism, which you actually get to fully experience other people's thoughts and feelings, but it does come close, and it does make you wonder if Philip K. Dick was intuiting the direction that um, collective ritual and myth would enact in a global planetary and technological age. But of course, he asks all the great questions that people have talked about in many interviews and reviews before about what is consciousness, what does it mean to be human, and so on. So, if you haven't read Do Androids Dream of Electric Sheep, I recommend that you do. It's a fun ride. It's a great narrative. Philip K. Dick is an excellent writer. Um, He's a little ambiguous at times with the storytelling, so it may get confusing and you may have to double take. But for me personally, I like that because the style affects you more. It's not a perfectly polished narrative. It confuses you, but I think in that confusion you kind of get immersed in the characters' own confusion and in their own world, and it kind of brings the world to life by being actually inconsistent or kind of random. Um, so yeah, I can go on about that theme, but I plan on reading a lot more Philip K. Dick in the coming year. I have that list on my reading list. I have many other books on my reading list right now. I'm actually reading Neil Gaiman, American Gods. So yeah, so expect many more book reviews in the future. So thanks for listening, guys, and yeah, pick up this book if you haven't.